Happy 4th of July. We welcome all gathered today to celebrate America's independence and the birthday of our 30th president, Calvin Coolidge. Though this ceremony is smaller this year, we're very pleased that the White House sent a wreath to remember our nation's 30th president, and we are especially grateful to the National Guard, the Vermont National Guard, led by the Adjutant General, to deliver the wreath here in Plymouth Notch. I'm Matt Denhart from the Coolidge Foundation. I'd like to recognize our chairman, Amity Schlaze, who also joins us, past president. I see down there Bob Kirby. We thank you for being here. From the state of Vermont, we have Mr. William Jenny, the site administrator here in Plymouth Notch for 33 years, and many friends who are joining us. Thank you all for being here. I'd like now to introduce Brigadier General, the Adjutant General, Gregory Knight, who will offer some thoughts.
Thanks, Matt. Matt, Amity, thank you. Thank you for being here. This was my first time here. This time last year, unfortunately, I missed the event because I was in Senegal recognizing our birth of our nation with our embassy there. So General Rainville was here to speak on my behalf. She's the former Adjutant General. But it's an honor to be here today. And as a history major, I at least knew a little bit about Calvin Coolidge, but as I did some research to prepare, what I found was amazing. And it just reminds me that we could all do a little bit more of educating ourselves on this great man. So I look at him being a man of few words, and I looked at my notes on the way down, and I spent some time putting them together, and I probably can't do him justice, but we're going to try. So Silent Cal. And again, what I discovered was very profound. So we've experienced exponential change in the years since his passing. But I think there's a whole lot we can learn from him. I read of him having a reputation for being taciturn, no nonsense, somber. I read a little bit of his politics. And certainly, I read of him being a man of integrity, for being honest. But I was really surprised at the number of thought-provoking quotes. It's amazing. And we would do well, again, to read about him. And there are lessons to be learned. And I consider myself a reasonably good public speaker. But after I read on President Coolidge, I also realized I've got a lot of work to do. From my perspective, some of his quotes remain applicable today, especially in the world we're living in. And even though they're succinct, they require no interpretation. So I picked out a few of my favorites, and again, knowing the world we're experiencing right now, we cannot do everything at once. We can do something at once. And I've also noticed, probably more lately because I'm starting to pay a lot of attention, people talk. Some people talk a lot. But President Coolidge said, it takes a great man to be a good listener. And a significant meaning for me as a member of our military, the nation which forgets its defenders will itself be forgotten. So something I was talking to Matt a little bit earlier about assuming this office of Adjutant General. And this is probably something that other folks who are now in politics could benefit from. President Coolidge said, "I've noticed that nothing I've never said ever did me any harm." And similarly, if you don't say anything, you won't be called upon to repeat it. So I'm going to pay a little more attention to President Coolidge as I venture into politics, hopefully for a second term. But we also see President Coolidge's legacy on our own State House, a portion of what is now known as his Brave Little State of Vermont speech, given in Bennington in September 28 as he was touring Vermont to assess the recovery from the 1927 flood. This quote really, for me, exemplifies what I've seen across Vermont in visiting our different communities with the Guard, helping out with the Vermont Food Bank and doing food distribution and pop-up testing sites, and running the Strategic National Stockpile Warehouse. If the spirit of liberty should vanish in other parts of the Union and support of our institutions should languish, it could all be replenished from the generous store held by the people of this brave little state of Vermont. So in closing, again, thank you for allowing me the privilege of being here. Matt, I really appreciate it. But one last quote that I find particularly meaningful and something that I'm going to hang on to is, "The only way I know to drive out evil from the country is by the constructive method of filling it with good." Thank you all for being here. I really, again, appreciate and cherish this opportunity. Have a great 4th. And Matt, turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, General Knight, and thank you to the Vermont National Guard for being here today, but also for everything you've done in these challenging months. And I think it gives a lot of us a lot of comfort knowing that the Guard is there and helping provide steady leadership and relief to so many who need it. So thank you. You know, Coolidge would be very proud. He thought that state leadership was very important, especially in times like this. So thank you. I'd now like to introduce our chairman, Coolidge biographer, Amity Schlaze, who will read a passage from one of Coolidge's speeches. And her passage will be from the speech, The Inspiration of the Declaration, which was given in 1926 on the 150th anniversary of America's founding and the Declaration. That speech was given in Philadelphia. And to read a meaningful passage, please welcome Amity Schlaze.
Thank you all for coming. About the Declaration, there is a finality that is exceedingly restful. It is often asserted the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, that we've had new thoughts and new experiences which have given us a great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern. But that reasoning cannot be applied to this great charter. If all men are created equal, that is final. If they are endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions.
Thank you, Amity. We're honored to be here joined with members of the Coolidge family. We're joined by his great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. And we'll hear readings from a number of them. Continuing with the same speech, The Inspiration of the Declaration, will be Kyle Jeter. Kyle, please join us.
In its main features, the Declaration of Independence is a great spiritual document. It is a declaration not of material, but of spiritual conceptions. Equality, liberty, popular sovereignty. The rights of man, these are not elements which we can see and touch. They are ideals. They have their source and their roots in the religious convictions. They belong to the unseen world. Unless the faith of the American people in these religious convictions is to endure, the principles of our Declaration will perish. We cannot continue to enjoy the result if we neglect and abandon the cause.
Thank you, Kyle. It's such a wonderful speech, and here another passage from the same speech, again, The Inspiration of the Declaration. Please welcome Chase Jeter.
Governments do not make ideals, but ideals make governments. This is both historically and logically true. Of course, the government can help to sustain ideals and can create institutions through which they can be better observed, but their source, by their very nature, is in the people. The people have to bear their own responsibilities. There is no method by which that burden can be shifted to the government. It is not the enactment, but the observance of laws that creates the character of a nation.
Thank you, Chase. Next, we'll have Jake Harville, who will read from the speech Coolidge gave in Omaha, Nebraska, October 6, 1924. The speech is known as Toleration and Liberalism. Coolidge spoke about the importance of both toleration and a liberal free society. So please join Jake, please join us to read your selection.
We must not, in times of peace, permit ourselves to lose any part from the structure of patriotic unity. I make no plea for leniency towards those who are criminal or vicious, are open enemies of society, and are not prepared to accept the true standards of our citizenship. By tolerance, I do not mean indifference to evil. I mean respect for different kinds of good. Whether one traces his Americanisms back 3 centuries to the Mayflower or 3 years to the steerage is not half so important as whether his Americanism of today is real and genuine. No matter by what various crafts we came here, we are all now in the same boat.
Thank you, Jake. Our next reading will be a passage from a speech Coolidge gave as vice president in February of 1923, dedicating the Veterans Hospital in Tuskegee, Alabama. To read that, please welcome the great-granddaughter of President and Grace Coolidge, Jenny Sales Harville. Jenny.
It takes time and patience and perseverance to put into practice our theory of human rights. Lincoln knew that. If there was one virtue that he seemed to possess more than another, it was that of forbearance. It is well for us, who must live together as Americans, whatever our race or creed may be, constantly to remember his words. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Our greatest need is to live in harmony, in friendship, and in goodwill, not seeking an advantage over each other, but all trying to serve each other.
Thank you, Jenny. I think the message of service towards our common citizenship is very important. Finally, when President Coolidge was buried right here in 1933, his widow, Grace Coolidge, requested that a poem by Robert Richardson that later was adapted by Mark Twain be read. That poem is known as Warm Summer Sun, and joining us to read it today will be the President's great-great-granddaughter, Sheridan Harville. Sheridan.
Warm summer sun, shine kindly heal. Warm southern wind, blow softly heal. Green sod above, lie late, lie late. Good night, dear heart. Good night, good night.
Thank you, Sheridan. Well, thank you all again for joining us. I'd like also, we didn't hear from, but I would like to also recognize the great-grandson of the President, Chris Jeter, and his wife, Tammy Jeter, as well as David Harville, the great-grandson-in-law of the President. David often says he's the father of the great-great-grandchildren. And thank you very much to all of the Coolidge family for being here and for honoring us and letting us be a part of this celebration today. Thank you again all for joining us. We invite the members of the public throughout the afternoon to take a rose, which is available down at the bottom of the stairs, and bring it up as you pay your respects to the President and his family. We hope that that'll be a meaningful experience, and also one that can be done with adequate distance and at your own pace. But please, we hope that you'll join us in honoring the President in that way. We again thank the National Guard. Thank you, General, and your colleagues for being with us today. And thank all of you for being here and helping us remember our great 30th President. And it was wonderful to hear some of his words that continue to inspire many of us, even nearly a century later. Happy 4th of July. Happy birthday, President Coolidge. And to Vermonters and Americans everywhere, we thank you and say happy 4th. This concludes our ceremony.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Great.
Learning
experience for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, we
Now
look
I
forward to having you here
foundation.
next year. What's that?
Now I just have to join the foundation.
There you go. Well, we'd love to have you as a member.
I think it'll be awesome.
Yeah.
We really want that.